No one survives being left alone in these woods with that much guilt, Jake. That haunting line changed Sergeant Jake Ryland's fate the moment he was forced to his knees, tied beneath a rotting tree, waiting for the flames to end everything. At the same time, through the thick fog, a German shepherd named Koda, once a trained police dog, now abandoned and scarred, wandered, carrying wounds that never healed. Fate threw them together at the brink of death, and in one shocking act, Koda hurled himself into the fire, saving Jake and setting off a chain of events that would stun the entire state. From chasing down a vengeful criminal, unmasking a traitorous officer, to two broken souls confronting their past and fighting for justice and a second chance, this story goes far beyond survival. Where are you watching this video from? Drop your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and become part of a community that refuses to stay silent. The next chapter is coming, and you'll want to witness it for yourself. Sergeant Jake Ryland's body ached against the damp, rotting wood, but his mind barely registered the pain anymore. He was forced to his knees, arms wrenched behind his back, wrists wrapped in cold steel cable so tight it bit into his skin. The thick fog clung to his face, chilling the sweat on his brow. Under his legs, someone had stacked a bundle of waterlogged firewood, splashed with just enough kerosene to reek, but not enough to burn easily in this miserable swamp. The smell hung heavy. Oil, wet leaves, a hint of something sour and unfinished. Jake's uniform was muddy, his badge gone, his gun missing. He didn't fight the restraints anymore. The struggle had drained out of him in the first hour. He sat, back pressed to the coarse bark, staring down at the blackened pile beneath him. He almost laughed at how the wood refused to light, how the smoke drifted in thin, bitter threads. To someone else, this would be a nightmare. A policeman, stripped of power, left like a warning in the woods. But Jake didn't beg or scream. He welcomed the silence. To him, this wasn't punishment. It was release. He let his eyes close for a moment, head sinking forward, hearing the distant echo of his own voice from months ago. No one dies on my watch, not ever. Lies. The words had broken inside him the day David bled out in his arms, a civilian, young, harmless, caught in the crossfire of a raid gone wrong. Jake replayed that day over and over, unable to erase the shock in David's eyes, or the cold that spread from the boy's fingers. The department's official line was, "Tragic accident." Jake had told the grieving family, "We did everything we could." Another lie. He hadn't done enough, and he'd known it. Now, left here like some sacrifice, Jake couldn't escape the feeling that this was justice, not murder. Someone had gone to the trouble to make this scene look like an execution, but also like an accusation. No one had beaten him, no one had threatened him. Whoever did this wanted him alive long enough to understand exactly why he was chosen. Jake stared at the little glass bottle tossed at his feet, the last drops of kerosene soaking into the mud, and felt the weight of every mistake pressing down. He didn't pray. He just waited. The wind shifted. Smoke curled upward in slow, stubborn waves, never catching, just spreading the stench of failure. Jake tried to shift his weight, muscles burning, but the cable cut deeper. He wondered if anyone would find him and immediately dismissed the thought. No one would come. He was a ghost in this town now. Shunned by his own unit, living under the shadow of a botched investigation and whispers that never quite faded. He'd lost count of the nights he'd spent alone in his car, parked at the edge of Mossy Creek, staring into the mist, trying to convince himself that he deserved to move on. He never had. Now, as the haze thickened and the sun failed to break through, Jake found his mind drifting. Was this how David had felt in those last moments? Abandoned, helpless, betrayed by the system he'd trusted? Jake winced, swallowing hard. He knew he'd never be able to make amends. This was the punishment he'd been waiting for. A chill ran through him, not from the fog, but from the memory of that day, the blood on his hands, the useless apologies. A sound cut through the silence, a distant snap, the rustle of something moving through the underbrush. Jake stiffened, heart racing for the first time since he'd woken here. He squinted into the gray wall of trees but saw nothing. His mind raced. Maybe it was his captor? Maybe just an animal. He swallowed his panic. If this was the end, he would face it. The minutes stretched. The smoke kept rising, never catching. Jake's breathing slowed, each inhale filling his chest with the damp, bitter air. He remembered how his father used to say that guilt was a fire you couldn't outrun. It eats you from the inside until you beg for someone to put you out. Jake almost smiled at the irony. Here he was, waiting for a fire that refused to burn. A memory flickered. David's mother at the funeral. Eyes rimmed red, voice cold. You said you'd protect him. Jake's hands clenched. He forced himself not to cry, not now. He wondered if the person who left him here knew all the details, or if the accusations were just part of a game. He tested the cables again, feeling the steel bite in. Useless. Whoever did this wanted him powerless, not dead. At least, not yet. Another twig snapped, closer this time. Jake's body tensed, adrenaline spiking. He tried to lift his head, ready to stare down whatever came next. But his vision swam from the effort. The mist thickened, swirling around his face, making it impossible to tell if he was still alone. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding, mingling with the far-off drip of water. He listened. Nothing but the forest's breath and the steady hiss of smoke. He started to speak, voice rough from hours of silence. If you're out there, just get it over with. The words sounded small, defeated. No one answered. His thoughts circled back to the same place. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of leaving everything unfinished. Jake tried to focus, searching for some way out, but hopelessness pressed in from all sides. He found himself wishing for fire, for pain, for anything that would drown out the shame. The silence broke. This time, a low, unfamiliar growl echoed faintly from somewhere deep in the woods. Not a man's voice, not any sound Jake expected. For a second his police instincts sparked, analyzing the tone, the distance, the intent, but it faded quickly, swallowed by the swamp and the fog. Jake slumped forward, feeling the chill seep through his bones. Even the animals wanted nothing to do with him. The wood below his knees shifted. Jake looked down and saw a thin line of smoke drifting sideways, curling up toward his face. The fire was trying to live, but everything around it was wet, stubborn, and unwilling. He almost felt sympathy for it. Just then another memory jabbed at him, his partner's voice, furious. You froze, Jake. That's why he died. You froze, and you let him go. Jake squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the urge to shout back. He knew the truth, and it was uglier than any accusation. Somewhere in the murk, a figure watched him. He could sense it, feel the prickling weight of unseen eyes. Or maybe that was just his guilt, grown so large it pressed against reality. Jake sagged against his restraints, no longer pretending he had a chance. If you're listening, he whispered, I'm sorry. The words were lost to the trees. Time stretched, meaningless. Jake's world narrowed to the feeling of cable digging into flesh. The slow ache in his legs and the sour smoke that refused to become flame. He didn't see the moment something else began to shift in the woods, when a presence, silent, wounded, wary, caught the scent of oil, smoke, and despair. At the edge of the clearing, a pair of amber eyes blinked, tracking every movement, every shallow breath. He'd given up. But just beyond the tangled undergrowth, a creature more broken than himself was drawing closer. Pulled by the scent of injustice, drawn not to kill, but to confront a pain that echoed its own. Koda moved with careful, measured steps through the tangled brush. He wasn't the wild kind of stray people imagined, lurking at the edge of town. He was a survivor, a German shepherd that once knew commands and praise before harsh voices and hard hands turned every sign of humans into a threat. Hunger drove him today. But instinct was stronger. He never came closer than 50 meters to any fresh scent of people. always watching, always waiting for the world to show its worst. He had learned to move like a shadow, nose low, eyes scanning for danger, ears flicking at every sudden sound. Today, something unusual pulled him forward. A sharp chemical odor drifted on the heavy air. Kerosene, familiar from the nights people burned garbage or scared off animals. But underneath that, there was smoke, old fear, and something even darker, the metallic, bitter edge of hatred. Koda's hackles rose. He circled wide around the source, moving toward the dried-up stream bed where he'd learned to hunt frogs and drink from shallow puddles. Every step he scanned for movement, his mind replaying the lessons of every beating, every thrown rock, every broken promise he'd endured. He caught a whiff of something that did not belong. Not just oil and smoke, but the scent of leather, plastic, and burnt paper. A mix that carried memories of patrol cars and barking orders and the cold floor of a kennel. Curiosity battled with the voice in his head that screamed, "Stay away!" But Koda couldn't help himself. He prowled closer, eyes catching a shape half hidden in the brush. An old backpack, battered and left behind as if forgotten in a rush. Something about it made him pause. He sniffed around it, circling several times before nudging it open with his nose. The contents spilled out in a mess of charred folders and the warped corner of a photograph. Koda's breath caught. He sniffed, reading the story hidden in the ash and the scent. One document reeked of sweat, rage, and despair. The same flavors clinging to the humans who had once chained him to a post, starved him, punished him for every whimper. Another was a crumpled photograph, half burnt, showing the face of a young man he didn't recognize, but who smelled of tears and loss. Koda pawed at it, uncertain why the image sent a shiver through him. This bag was more than garbage. It was a warning left for someone who would understand. The scents tangled in the fabric told him the bag was planted, meant to be found. A new sound snapped him to attention, a faint, desperate groan drifting on the edge of hearing. Koda stiffened, every muscle tensed. He didn't move toward the noise right away. Instead, he circled wider, searching for signs of a trap. He'd learned never to trust a simple answer, never to trust kindness, never to trust people. But the groan came again, low and raw, and something old stirred in him, something that remembered what it was like to protect, not just survive. Koda approached slowly, eyes locked on the figure slumped by the tree. The smell of kerosene was sharpest here, and beneath it he could sense a kind of sickness, regret, and utter exhaustion. The man wore a uniform. He recognized the stiff fabric and the faded stripes from his training days. But the man was on his knees, wrists bound tight behind his back, head bowed. He wasn't a threat, not a hunter. He looked beaten, hollowed out by something deeper than pain. Koda growled under his breath, unsure. His training warred with his instincts. Everything about humans told him to run, to hide, to expect betrayal, but something about the broken posture of this man, the resigned set of his shoulders, made him pause. He sniffed again and caught the sharp tang of tears and the dull ache of despair. This man was not here to do harm. He was the target. Another groan, softer, almost a whisper. Koda's ears pricked up. He took 2 cautious steps forward, circling to the side. The man flinched at the sound, then went still, as if bracing for pain. Koda hesitated, remembering the sting of boots, the cold of chains, the endless shouting, but the memory of the backpack. Photo. The stink of hatred pushed him on. He drew nearer, close enough now to see the way the man's breath misted in the chilly air, the bruises on his wrists where the cable bit deep. Koda's tail stayed low, his body ready to bolt, but curiosity and something older, a buried sense of duty, kept him rooted. He sniffed at the ground, catching traces of another man, the one who left the oil and the threat. But that trail was old, empty. This one was helpless. Koda barked once, short and sharp, testing the reaction. The man lifted his head, eyes blinking through the fog, face etched with fear and something else. Maybe hope, maybe shame. "Who's there?" the voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Koda didn't move. He watched, head tilted, waiting. The man closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek, and said quietly, "Just get it over with." That struck something deep in Koda, a memory of his own, of cold hands and a voice saying, "Not good enough, never good enough." The sounds of the swamp faded into background noise. It was just the two of them now, predator and prey, except the roles had blurred. Koda understood in that moment. This man was not the enemy. He was another victim in someone else's cruel story. The realization sent a ripple of energy through Koda's body. Survival wasn't the only thing that mattered here. There was something bigger at stake. He circled once more, nose to the ground, checking for more threats, but found only the overlapping stench of fear, kerosene, and burnt regret. He turned back to the man, stepping in closer, just out of reach. The man let out a shaky breath, not daring to move. Koda took another step, head low, gaze steady. The memory of the photograph flickered in his mind. He realized the man in front of him and the boy in the photo were connected by tragedy. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the man's body sagged, as if all fight had gone out of him. He whispered, "I'm sorry." Koda's ears flicked. He recognized the tone, if not the words. It was the sound of surrender. A fresh scent caught Koda's attention, a warning that something or someone was coming back. Instead, he planted himself between the man and the path, eyes locked on the shadows beyond the trees. Something primal surged through him. For years, people had made him a weapon, a target, a stray. Now in this moment, he was something else. Not a hunter, not a victim, but a shield. Marcus Thorne's footsteps crunched through the wet undergrowth, the sound sending a warning through the air. He emerged from the shadows, eyes wild and rimmed with red, fingers wrapped around a battered canister of gasoline and a silver lighter. The tension hit Jake like a punch. There was no negotiation in Marcus's stare, just a hollow certainty, the kind that comes from having nothing left to lose. Without a word, Marcus knelt near Jake and slammed the canister to the ground. The harsh, sour scent of fuel filled the clearing. Jake met his gaze, jaw clenched. Refusing to flinch, Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out the charred police file, waving it like a flag. His voice came out raw, echoing through the trees. "You want to know why you're here, Rylan? You let him die. All that talk about protecting the innocent. You failed. And the world needs to know what that looks like." Jake's shoulders tightened under the weight of accusation. He tried to speak, but Marcus cut him off. "Save your apologies. You cops always have excuses. This," he jabbed the file at Jake's chest, "is justice." Then he began reading aloud from the burned report, voice shaking with anger and old grief. The words were names, dates, mistakes, all the details Jake had tried to bury. Marcus's voice broke on David's name, and for a moment the threat faded, replaced by raw, human pain. But Marcus wasn't here for conversation. He doused the pile of wood at Jake's knees, the gasoline soaking through and pooling in the mud. Jake braced for the flame, resignation and terror mixing in his chest. Marcus flicked the lighter, the click loud in the charged silence. The first spark danced, then caught the edge of a stick. Flame licked up, smoke billowing. Jake felt the heat, panic rising despite himself. Then, from the far side of the clearing, a snarl ripped through the stillness, sharp and unnatural. Marcus jerked around, eyes wide, as Koda burst from cover with terrifying speed. Koda's body launched forward, every muscle coiled for impact. He didn't bark, he didn't snap at Marcus. He fixed on the fire itself. With one leap, he crashed into the smoldering wood, scattering burning sticks and splattering fuel in all directions. Jake recoiled, expecting pain, but Koda drove his forepaws into the flames, scraping the logs away, rolling over the embers, his own fur singed at the edges but refusing to retreat. The fire sputtered, gasping for air, then faded under the assault. Jake choked out a stunned breath. Marcus shouted, stumbling back, "Get away from there, you stupid mutt!" The scene froze in a moment of shock. Marcus stood, lighter clenched tight, unsure whether to fight the dog or run. Koda planted himself between Jake and the would-be arsonist, fur bristling, lips curled back in a warning snarl. The look in his eyes was pure threat. Marcus swore, backing up a step. "What the hell? Whose dog is this?" His voice cracked, fear creeping in for the first time. Jake struggled against the cable, desperate to move, but he was helpless. Don't hurt him," he managed to croak. Koda's growl rose, fierce and unbroken, filling the clearing. Marcus hesitated, weighing his chances. The dog's presence changed the dynamic, forcing him off script. This wasn't about retribution anymore. The game had shifted, and Marcus knew it. Koda's instincts drove him to protect, but not for Jake's sake. He recognized the scent of danger, the volatile mix of fuel and rage. He had been hurt enough to know what real threats looked like. His attack was precise, controlled, focused only on eliminating the risk. The flames smoldered under his body, but he held his ground, eyes never leaving Marcus. The message was clear. Any move, and he would strike. Jake saw it too, the raw courage in the battered animal standing guard over a stranger. Something in him broke, a swell of gratitude tangled with shame. "It's all right, boy. You saved me," he whispered. But Koda didn't glance his way. His focus was absolute, fixed on Marcus. Marcus lunged, trying to circle the dog and relight the fire, but Koda anticipated the move, snapping his jaws inches from Marcus's hand. The lighter tumbled to the mud. Marcus cursed, scrambling back, chest heaving. For a split second, the three of them stood locked in a standoff. Jake pinned, Marcus trembling, and Koda, battered but unbroken, claiming the center. The clearing crackled with tension. Marcus's resolve wavered. He pointed at Koda, spit flying. "That thing's not a hero, it's just an animal. You're not worth saving, Rylan." His voice hitched, venom turning to desperation. Koda's answer was a low, guttural snarl that rattled Marcus's nerves. In that instant, Jake realized the dog wasn't just reacting, he was choosing, refusing to let violence decide the outcome. Marcus stumbled away, torn between fight and flight, fury warring with the new, cold edge of fear. Marcus was trembling with fury, the veins in his neck bulging as he stumbled closer to Jake. "You think you can just walk away from what you did?" he spat, swinging the long metal lighter in his fist like a weapon. Jake flinched but couldn't defend himself. Marcus barely looked at the battered man, his eyes locked on the dog. Koda braced himself, hackles raised, every muscle tense. The metallic click of the lighter echoed, then came the sudden crack as Marcus swung down and caught Koda on the side of the head. The blow wasn't clean, but it was enough to send pain ringing through Koda's skull. He staggered, vision blurring for a split second. Then he lunged. Koda's teeth closed hard on Marcus's arm. The taste of sweat, blood, and rage filled his mouth. Marcus yelled, cursing, swinging wildly to shake him off. Koda released, only to clamp down again, this time on the man's wrist, jaws locking just above the bone. The lighter clattered to the mud. Get off me, you piece of garbage," Marcus shouted. But Koda held fast. Marcus tried to wrench free, but the German shepherd only tightened his grip, his eyes cold and unblinking. With a desperate twist, Marcus slammed his free hand against Koda's muzzle, but the dog let go just as suddenly. The man's keys slipped from his grasp, tumbling down and vanishing in the mud at Jake's feet. Both men froze for a heartbeat. Marcus stared at the spot where the keys disappeared, realizing what he'd lost, his face twisted in panic and rage. "You stupid animal. You don't even know what you've done." He lunged again, boots skidding in the wet earth, but Koda darted sideways, putting himself between Marcus and the dropped keys. Jake watched the chaos play out, helpless and desperate. His heart pounded in his ears. The pain from the cable at his wrists was nothing compared to the fear that Marcus would recover and finish what he'd started. But Koda didn't back down. He snapped at Marcus's legs, driving him backward, away from the evidence. Marcus cursed, spit flying from his lips. "You're not a hero. You're a reject. Just like your handler said. You're nothing." His voice cracked, teetering between hate and humiliation. Koda's growl deepened. The words weren't just noise. Somewhere in his mind, old wounds ripped open, the memories of trainers calling him useless, the sting of being chained for failing a command, the sting of a boot or a belt. Every ounce of pain turned into raw anger. He showed his teeth, never looking away, his body shielding the dropped keys from Marcus's reach. The man hesitated, chest heaving, knuckles white with tension. Marcus took one last swing, trying to scare the dog away, but Koda barely flinched. Instead, he lunged, jaws snapping so close to Marcus's thigh that the man stumbled and nearly fell. That was enough. Marcus backed off, rage turning to cowardice. He spat at the ground. "You're not worth it. Neither of you. You're both dead anyway." He turned and sprinted into the trees, leaving behind a trail of threats. Silence hit hard. Koda stood in place, chest rising and falling, ears pricked for any sign that Marcus might return. His side throbbed where the lighter had struck, but he ignored it. Jake slumped in his bonds, the air finally returning to his lungs. "Good boy," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You saved me." Koda flicked an ear, not quite ready to accept comfort from a human. Koda's gaze dropped to the ground, focusing on the key Marcus had dropped. It was small, grimy, attached to a keychain shaped like a broken bridge. Something about it felt important. He sniffed at it, catching the sense of metal, sweat, and something unfamiliar. Fear, maybe? Or guilt? Koda hesitated. He could have run. This was his chance to vanish into the woods, leave the mess behind, return to the empty life he understood. He didn't owe these men anything. Humans had only ever brought him pain, but the key was more than a shiny object. His instincts screamed that it mattered, that whatever was planned for Jake, whatever Marcus had started, hinged on that tiny piece of metal. He stood guard over it, pressing his paw against it, refusing to let it be lost in the mud. Jake watched him, tears threatening, but too exhausted to speak. Koda glanced at him, seeing not a threat, not a master, but a man as lost as he was. For a brief moment, Jake and Koda stared at each other, two survivors, battered by different battles, both chained by someone else's mistakes. Jake's eyes pleaded for help, but he didn't beg. He simply waited, accepting whatever the dog would do next. Koda hesitated, then lowered his head, nuzzling the key closer to Jake's feet, not a gesture of loyalty, but of necessity. The rain started again, slow and cold, washing away blood and sweat, but not the tension that gripped them both. Koda looked toward the dark path Marcus had taken, ears straining for any sign of a return. He could still run. He could vanish and never look back, but something in the man's voice, the way he'd been called a failure, dug into Koda's memory. He couldn't leave. Not yet. The broken bridge on the keychain caught a shaft of weak light, glinting with the weight of secrets. Koda pressed his paw against it again, refusing to budge. Jake drew a shaky breath, understanding what the dog was doing. "You're protecting the evidence," he murmured. Koda huffed, neither confirming nor denying, eyes fixed on the tree line. Jake twisted his wrists, trying to work the cable loose, fingers numb from the cold and the pressure. Every tug sent a jolt up his arm, but giving up wasn't an option. His eyes darted to Koda, who kept watch by the patch of mud where the key had fallen. The dog's focus was absolute, ready to lunge at any sign of threat. Jake's thoughts raced, searching for an escape. He scanned the ground, desperate for something, anything that could help. That's when he noticed the dark, half-buried shape of a police radio, half sunken in the sludge near his hip. He wriggled, straining to reach it with trembling fingers. Every inch felt like a mile, but the plastic finally slid closer. He clenched it in his fist and fumbled with the dials. Static crackled in his ear. "This is Sergeant Jake Rylan. I need immediate assistance. Repeat. I need backup at Mossy Creek Woods." His voice was ragged, hope nearly drowned by exhaustion. A few seconds passed. Then a woman's voice came through, steady but edged with skepticism. "Rylan? This is Detective Ava Shaw. You're not on our grid. What's your location?" Jake winced, trying to sit up. "I'm tied up. I can't see much. There's a clearing, some kind of old creek bed. You'll see smoke, Someone tried to burn me alive. The silence stretched, broken only by static and the occasional shuffle of Koda's paws. Ava's tone hardened. Is this a joke? Ryland, why would you be out there alone? Jake's patience snapped. I'm not alone. There's a dog. A German shepherd. He stopped them. He's got something important. Please, just send help. The pause this time was longer. Ava's voice came back, clipped and professional. Describe your injuries. Jake closed his eyes, the pain making his answer short. Nothing I can't handle, but I'm tied up and whoever did this is still out there. Koda, picking up on Jake's anxiety, moved closer, placing his body between Jake and the trees. Jake's eyes flicked to him, then to the radio. I can't get free. I need you to trust me, Ava. There's a key, a car key with a broken bridge on it. The dog is guarding it. On the other end, Ava's skepticism bled through. A key? What are you talking about, Rylan? He tried to keep his voice steady. It's evidence. I don't know what it unlocks, but it's the only thing that matters right now. Just please, listen to me. Koda suddenly growled, his attention snapping to movement in the brush. Jake's heart jumped. Ava, I think the suspect might come back. Send someone, now. The radio hissed again. Stay on the line. Do not move. Backup is en route. Jake almost laughed at the order. Moving wasn't an option. He watched as Koda prowled in a tight circle, ears up, every muscle tight. Jake's mind raced. He had to find a way to show this wasn't just a random stray. Hey, boy, over here, he called softly. Koda looked at him, wary but attentive. Jake jerked his head toward the radio. Can you help me? Koda hesitated, then patted over. Jake pushed the radio forward with his foot. Speak, he whispered, half in desperation, half in hope. At first, nothing happened. Koda just sniffed at the device, head cocked. Jake repeated, louder, Speak! Koda looked at him, then at the radio, and suddenly let out a sharp, distinctive bark. A clipped, controlled sound that echoed commands from another life. The effect was immediate. On the other end, Ava's voice changed. Wait, that's not a wild bark. That's a trained response. Rylan, who's with you? Is that a canine? Jake swallowed, the realization hitting him. Yeah, he's not mine, but he saved me. He followed orders. Ava, he knows the key is important. Ava's disbelief gave way to urgency. Describe the dog. Markings, tags, anything. Jake did his best, rattling off what he could see. Black and tan fur, no collar, eyes sharp, scars around the neck. Ava sounded distant now, conferring with someone else. Then she came back, voice softer, but still laced with authority. Listen to me. Keep the dog close. Help is coming, but you need to stay alert. Jake nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He shifted in the dirt, feeling the cable cut deeper. Koda, stay, he ordered, testing if the dog would listen. Koda froze, head raised, gaze flicking between Jake and the dark beyond. Another bark, this one softer, almost a question. Jake almost smiled. Good boy, just hang on, all right? The minutes dragged. Jake's mind whirled with questions. Why would a trained dog be out here, alone and abandoned? Who left him? And why would he risk himself for a stranger? The idea nagged at him, pushing aside his own pain. Jake cleared his throat, pressing the radio button. Ava, this dog is special. I think he's a canine that got left behind. He's smart, brave. He found the key. He's the reason I'm alive. Ava's reply was quick, clipped. We're tracing the key. Don't do anything reckless, Rylan. If the suspect returns, don't provoke him. Keep the line open. Jake grunted in agreement, feeling a wave of fatigue crash over him. He looked at Koda, who sat down beside him, posture tense but not hostile. In that silence, an uneasy partnership formed, not out of trust or affection, but pure necessity. Jake broke the silence, voice rough. You're not like other dogs, are you? Koda stared back, unreadable. Jake reached out, fingers shaking, hoping for some sign of acceptance. Koda inched forward, sniffed Jake's hand, then retreated, just enough to make it clear. He'd help, but he wasn't looking for a friend. Jake got it. We're just two survivors, he muttered, more to himself than to Koda. Suddenly, static erupted on the radio. Ava's voice back and sharp. Rylan, is everything all right? Do you have the key? Jake blinked, snapping out of his trance. It's here. The dog's watching it. We're not going anywhere. Ava's tone softened, just a hint. Good. Stay alive, both of you, Jake exhaled, a flicker of hope taking root. The crisis wasn't over, but for the first time he didn't feel alone. This dog, this battered, scarred animal, had given him a fighting chance. The bond wasn't built on trust, not yet, but on the fact that both of them had been left for dead and refused to give up. The radio was silent again. Jake's thoughts churned. Why would a police dog be abandoned in these woods? What happened to his handler? And why, when everything seemed lost, would a broken animal risk himself for a broken man? The only answer Jake had was the one Koda had just given. He saw something worth protecting. That realization burned deeper than pain or fear. Jake squeezed the radio, preparing for whatever came next. He didn't know if they'd make it out. But he knew, without a doubt, that neither of them would quit until the fight was over. The canine's bark had shattered the doubt in Ava's voice and rattled the foundation of Jake's own fear. It also left him with a new urgent question. Why would a trained service dog end up out here, abandoned and alone, only to choose to save a disgraced cop? Jake would have to face that mystery soon enough. For now, the only thing he could do was hold on and hope backup would arrive before the darkness closed in again. Sirens cut through the tense silence, their sharp wails driving a wave of urgency into the clearing. Jake barely managed to turn his head, relief warring with anxiety. He'd called for backup, but now that they were here, everything felt more fragile. Koda stood between Jake and the approaching rescue team, his body rigid, fur bristling, every muscle announcing that he would allow no one close. The first responder stepped into view, hand hovering near a tranquilizer gun. He paused, reading the animal's posture. That dog isn't letting anyone through, he muttered into his shoulder radio. Detective Ava Shaw was next to appear, her eyes locking straight onto Jake and then onto the German shepherd. Rylan, is that the canine you mentioned? She called, trying to keep her voice steady. She gripped a heavy-duty flashlight, long, metallic, and threatening, even if she meant it for protection. Koda's growl deepened, turning low and violent when he saw the object in her hand. His entire body shifted, standing his ground with an intensity that made everyone freeze. Jake's pulse hammered in his ears. He could see Koda's fear mixing with fury, and he knew that one wrong move from the team could trigger chaos. One paramedic tried to circle to Jake's side, but Koda blocked him, baring his teeth. "Nobody moves!" Jake shouted. "Don't touch the dog. He's not going to back down." The standoff stretched, thick with distrust. Jake's pain screamed for attention, but he forced himself to focus. He had to fix this before someone did something reckless. Ava inched forward, voice tight. "Rylan, can you control him?" Jake hesitated, memory searching for something useful. He remembered a story from a fellow officer, a handler who taught him a few canine commands at the bar one night, just in case. He drew a ragged breath, then forced out the only word that came to mind. "Zurich!" Jake barked. The command hung in the air, heavy with hope and desperation. Koda's reaction was immediate, but not quite what Jake wanted. The dog's ears twitched. He broke his glare, glancing at Jake with uncertainty. It was a test. Koda took 3 slow steps back, just enough to make room, just enough to show he understood. But his eyes never left Ava or the others. He would give them space, but not trust. Jake collapsed forward as the tension in his shoulders released. The rescue team surged into action, but all moved cautiously, as if one wrong gesture would snap the truce. Ava was first to his side. She kept her movements careful, placing the flashlight on the ground before kneeling. "We're going to get you out." "Rylan!" "Don't move!" The paramedics swarmed in, working quickly to free his hands and check his injuries. Jake grimaced, pain flaring as the cables fell away. But he didn't take his eyes off Koda. The dog stayed near the edge of the circle, body low, still coiled with suspicion. The team lifted Jake onto a stretcher, working fast but under Koda's watchful gaze. Every time Ava got too close, the shepherd's growl rumbled again, deeper, angrier. She paused, keeping her hands visible, speaking gently. "It's all right, boy. No one's going to hurt him." Her words fell flat. Koda's distrust was absolute. The air buzzed with a tension that no one dared break. As Jake was moved away from the spot where he'd nearly died, Koda circled around, head low, tracking every motion. The team hesitated, unsure whether to push him back or let him follow. It didn't matter. Koda had already made his decision. The second Jake was fully free and lifted, Koda darted in, ignoring everyone else. He dropped the muddy car key with the broken bridge into Jake's open palm, then backed away just as quickly, almost vanishing into the background. Jake stared at the key, the shape gritty in his hand, and realized its importance all over again. "He brought evidence," Jake said, voice cracking with emotion. "He knows." Ava stared at the dog, then at Jake. "Who trained this dog?" she demanded. No one answered. Koda had retreated to the shadows, as if his job was finished and he was ready to disappear. The paramedics fussed over Jake, checking his pulse and patching up his wrists. But his eyes kept searching the clearing for the German shepherd. Ava knelt beside him, keeping her voice low. "That's no ordinary stray. That's a trained dog. But why would he be out here alone?" Jake shook his head. "He saved me, but he's not doing it out of loyalty. He's doing it because he knows what's at stake. This is about survival, not trust." He held up the key. "This is the real reason we're all here." Koda watched them with wary eyes. He wasn't looking for praise. He only wanted to make sure the evidence was handed over and that he had a way out if the humans turned on him again. The rescue team moved Jake to the ambulance, glancing back over their shoulders at the dog, who had just forced them all to rethink what loyalty looked like. Before they closed the doors, Jake looked directly at Koda. "You don't have to run," he whispered. Koda stayed put, chest heaving, as if he were weighing his options. The shepherd didn't move, but the growl that rumbled from his throat was the only warning the team needed. He was not ready to forgive, not ready to let them in. Ava studied the scene, piecing together what had happened. "We have the evidence, and a witness. If he'll trust us," she muttered. Jake's mind spun. He realized that saving his own life was only half the battle. The other half would be trying to save the animal who had saved him. The paramedics wheeled Jake toward the waiting ambulance, and Koda melted into the edge of the trees, refusing to come any closer. The cold key in Jake's hand felt like a message. It wasn't just proof of a crime. It was a silent accusation, a demand for justice from someone who'd been betrayed too many times. Koda's final growl echoed long after the sirens faded, a reminder that no one's trust is ever given for free. Jake understood. The wall between them was real. If he wanted to save Koda, he'd have to find a way to break through it, and the only way to do that was to find the truth before the damage became permanent. The broken bridge on the keychain burned in Jake's palm. The dog who'd risked everything for a stranger was out there, running from every betrayal he'd ever known. If Jake wanted to honor that courage, he'd have to start searching for answers before Koda vanished, and before the real villain walked away for good. The hospital room was anything but peaceful. Machines beeped at regular intervals, nurses bustled in and out, but Jake barely noticed. He was propped up on thin pillows, a bandage wrapping his wrist, a new set of bruises peeking out from the collar of his gown. Detective Ava Shaw stood at the foot of his bed, arms folded, her expression all business, but her eyes sharp with something more. Maybe suspicion. Maybe curiosity. She dropped a sealed evidence bag on the tray. "You're lucky to be alive, Ryland. Care to explain how a burned-out canine and a car key with a busted bridge saved your life?" Jake's throat was raw, but he forced his voice to stay level. "Marcus Thorne left me out there. He tried to set me on fire. He described the attack, the rope, the wood, the gasoline." Ava didn't flinch. She flipped through her notes, then pushed the bag closer. "You said the dog saved you. Tell me about Marcus." Jake recounted the encounter, the threats, the accusations, the moment Marcus had screamed that Jake let David die. "Marcus is David's brother," he finished, exhaustion dripping from every syllable. Ava's pen paused midair. "You sure about that?" She snapped open a thin file, scorched at the edges. Inside, the contents were blackened but intact. A half-burned police report and a photo Jake knew too well. David's face, frozen in a candid moment, eyes too bright, grin crooked. Jake's breath caught. He stared at the words, scrawled in heavy, erratic ink across the bottom of the photo. Not you. Different. Jake's confusion warred with shame. What is that supposed to mean? He muttered, fingers shaking. Ava leaned in. It means Marcus isn't blaming you for David's death. He thinks you're guilty of something else. She read from her notes. The word is warning, not revenge. He wanted you scared, desperate, but not dead. She slid the file closer. Read the rest. There's more. Jake picked up the pages. Beneath the anger and the accusation, there was a pattern. Dates, times, gaps in reports, and references to a missing officer. Marcus had been tracking something for years. He hadn't set the fire out of pure hatred. He was trying to send a message. Dig deeper. Jake let that sink in. Marcus's actions hadn't been random violence. He had orchestrated everything to push Jake to the edge, but not to finish him off. That realization hit hard. Ava's voice was softer, but more dangerous for it. Marcus wants you to burn for the truth you let go cold, Rylan. Not for David's death, but for not following the evidence after. Jake stared at the ceiling, the weight of his guilt shifting. He wanted to scare me, not kill me. He thinks there's someone else responsible, someone I let slip away. A silence fell between them. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of ugly truths crawling out of the shadows. Jake clenched his jaw, remembering how quickly the department had closed the file on David's death. There'd been rumors, an uneasy vibe among the officers, but he'd buried his doubt. He'd wanted so badly to move on that he never pushed for the real answers. That made him complicit, maybe, not in the crime, but in the cover-up. Ava studied him. You're not the first person to make mistakes on this job, but you might be the first to get a second chance to fix them. She jabbed a finger at the photo. That's a message from Marcus. He's telling you to find the real culprit. Jake's shoulders slumped. And if I don't? Ava's stare didn't blink. You saw what he's willing to do. He doesn't want you dead. He wants you to expose whoever actually killed David. Jake looked at the photo again, feeling every ounce of the old loss twisting into something sharper. He wants me to suffer with the truth. A nurse entered, checked Jake's IV, then left as quickly as she'd come. Dr. Ben slipped in behind her, carrying a different kind of file, one with a paw print on the cover. Heard you had a run-in with a hero dog, Ben said. He's been picked up by animal control. They're calling him aggressive. If you want to see him, you'll have to vouch for him. Jake nodded, mind racing. That dog is the only reason I'm here. Ben studied him. Funny how we rely on animals to do what people won't. Ava interjected. You trust this dog? Jake didn't hesitate. He's the only thing that makes sense right now. Ben handed him a form. Then get down there before they decide he's a threat. Ava packed up the evidence, sliding the burned photo back into its sleeve. If you want to catch Marcus, you need to find out who he's hunting. And you're going to need help. Jake stared at the door, realizing that his next step wasn't about proving his own innocence. It was about finally facing the truth he'd ignored for too long. He reached for his clothes, ignoring the pain in his side. Ava blocked his way. I'm coming with you. I don't trust your sense of timing. Jake managed a ghost of a smile. Didn't think you'd let me out of your sight. Ben spoke up. I'll be at animal control. The dog's got issues. Don't push him. Jake pocketed the burned keychain. It was more than a clue. It was a summons. Ava stopped him before he reached the door. You realize Marcus could have killed you. But he didn't. He wants you to find something and he's going to keep pushing until you do. Jake's response was a whisper. He wants me to burn with the truth. The lesson wasn't lost on Jake. This was never about personal revenge. It was about forcing him to see what he'd missed. If Marcus had meant to kill, Jake would already be dead. The attack was a test, a warning, a brutal push toward answers he'd run from. He owed it to David. He owed it to himself. And, now, he owed it to the dog waiting for him in a cage. As angry and betrayed as Jake felt, That was the message Marcus left smoldering in a photograph. Not you, different. Go find the truth. Jake's body ached, but his resolve was set, and he knew the only one who could lead him to it was trapped behind bars, needing trust even more than freedom. Jake pushed through the heavy doors of animal control, nerves buzzing beneath his skin. The waiting area was a blur of voices and the distant echo of barking. A staff member waved him through to the back, where Dr. Ben stood outside a row of kennels. Arms folded, clipboard pressed tight to his chest. "He's in the last cage," Ben said, his voice quieter than usual. "You ready for this, Jake?" Jake didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the single barred enclosure at the end, where Koda paced with restless, jagged energy. The shepherd was nothing like the stoic guardian from the woods. Here, in a steel cage, he looked wild, lost, and dangerous. When he spotted Jake, Koda lunged at the bars, snarling with teeth bared. The sound rattled the metal, drawing warning glances from the handlers. Ben stepped in front of Jake. "Let me explain," he said. "That dog's been through more than you know." Jake's gaze didn't waver. "He saved my life. I owe him." Ben shook his head. "It's not that simple. Koda was a canine, trained, disciplined. But he failed a big evaluation. His handler didn't have the patience or the heart to work through it. The department sent him back for retraining. Instead, he got punishment. Isolation, negative reinforcement, you name it. They gave up on him. He got dumped in the system, bounced around, learned the hard way that trusting people is a mistake." Ben lowered his voice. "That key you brought in? Koda was part of a unit that used that route. I don't think you realize how close this all runs to home." Jake processed this in silence, watching Koda's hackles rise. Every time Jake's police belt shifted, Koda's aggression flared, snapping at the bars, a haunted look in his eyes. Ben stepped back. "That's classic PTS. Certain sounds, smells, even your gear, they're all triggers. He thinks you're going to hurt him. That's all he's ever known from uniforms lately." Jake removed his belt, letting it drop to the floor with a dull thud. Koda's reaction wasn't relief, but confusion. The dog eyed the fallen belt, then Jake, unable to let go of his guard. Jake crouched low, making himself as small as possible, and kept his hands visible. He pulled a crumpled piece of biscuit from his pocket and rolled it toward the bars, careful not to make sudden movement. Koda sniffed the treat. Suspicion etched in every movement. Jake didn't say a word. He didn't reach for commands or whistles. Instead, he sat in silence, gaze down, shoulders slumped. "I failed too," Jake said quietly. "I made a mistake I can't take back. Someone got hurt because I hesitated. I've been trying to forgive myself, but it's never enough." He glanced at Koda, voice raw. "You're not the only one they threw away." The dog's breathing slowed. Koda inched closer to the bars, teeth no longer bared, but muscles still tense. Jake broke the silence with a confession meant for both of them. "I keep thinking about that night. How I froze, how I let the pressure get to me. I thought if I buried it deep enough, it'd go away. But it doesn't." The words hung in the air, heavy and honest. Ben kept his distance but didn't interrupt. Jake held the dog's gaze for a second, then looked away, refusing to make it a challenge. "You don't owe me anything, Koda. But we both know there's more to this case. You want the truth. So do I. But I can't do it alone." He slid another piece of biscuit through the gap, patient, refusing to push. Koda sniffed, mouth twitching, before finally taking it and chewing slowly. The aggression ebbed, replaced with a wary curiosity. Jake glanced at Ben. "If you want him to help, you can't treat him like an animal that failed. He needs a job. He needs a reason." Ben nodded. "He needs trust. So do you." The conversation was stripped of false hope. Both men watched the shepherd process the simple act of being fed by a human who wasn't demanding anything in return. Minutes passed with only the sound of Koda licking the last crumbs from the floor. Jake leaned against the wall, exhaustion washing through him, but he kept talking. "I'm going after the one who really hurt David. Marcus thinks I let him go, but I just didn't see it. If you want out, Koda, all you have to do is stay back. But if you want justice, if you want to fix what they did to us, then help me. I won't use you. I won't order you around. But I could use a partner. Koda met his eyes, head tilted. He didn't move to the bars again, but the hostility was gone, replaced by a sense of careful consideration. Ben opened the file he'd brought and held it where Jake could read it. "It's all in here," he said softly. "Medical records, evaluation notes, everything." That dog was let down by every person who should have fought for him. Jake nodded, barely able to swallow. "We're not so different. The trust that began with a broken biscuit wasn't friendship, it was a truce, forged in shared failure and unspoken pain." Jake didn't beg. He didn't plead. He simply made his promise and waited to see if the dog would accept it. Koda lay down, never taking his eyes off Jake, muscles still taut but less likely to strike. The next move belonged to him. Jake stood, slow and steady. He gathered the file, his police belt, and the burned key. He paused at the kennel door, speaking over his shoulder. "I'm not walking away from this, not from you, not from the truth." Ben watched him go, his expression mixed with relief and worry. That single piece of biscuit had become a lifeline, a simple gesture that bridged the gap between two wounded souls. But if Jake wanted Koda's help in the hunt for the real killer, he'd have to prove that the search for truth mattered more than pride, more than rank, more than either of their lives. Trust wasn't won by command, only by action. That was the deal, one broken survivor to another. The question was whether they'd both be strong enough to keep it. Jake sat across from Ava in the cramped, overlit office that felt more like an interrogation cell than a command post. A trail of paperwork, police photos, and crime scene sketches cluttered her desk, but the only thing Jake saw was the worn keychain with the broken bridge, cold metal pressed into his palm like a reminder of everything left unresolved. Ava picked it up, turning it over, her eyes flicking between the object and Jake's face. "It matches the maintenance records for the old warehouse near Mossy Creek," she said. "The same area where David died. The same place Marcus disappeared." She pushed a folder toward him. "You know how bad this looks, right? Marcus wants you to find him, but he might be setting a trap." Jake's answer was steady. "I can't back off now. Every lead we've had points there. If he wanted me dead, I'd be dead." Ava narrowed her gaze. "I'm putting together a tactical team. We'll use the K9 unit, real professionals." Jake shook his head, frustration building. "No, you don't get it. Koda's the only one who can track Marcus through that mess. He knows the scent, he knows the pain. I'm not taking a squad in there with flashbangs and shouting. That'll just drive Marcus deeper." Ava bristled. "You want to put your life in the paws of a half-wild, rejected canine?" Jake didn't flinch. "That dog saved my life when nobody else would. He didn't do it because of training. He did it because he recognized what I was feeling. If you want to find Marcus before someone else gets hurt, you have to trust Koda." Ava leaned back, skeptical but intrigued. "This is your career you're gambling. If this goes sideways, you're done." Jake nodded, voice calm but firm. "I'd rather lose my badge than let someone else die for my mistakes." Silence settled in, thick with the weight of decisions. Ava stared at the board, then at Jake, trying to read the desperation beneath his control. "I'll authorize it," she finally said, "but I'm coming. And if that dog even twitches at the wrong person, he's done. Understood?" Jake met her eyes. "Understood, but you have to let me handle him. You have to let me keep the promise I made to him and to David." He didn't say the rest, that it was more than a promise. It was the last thread holding him together. They made their plan in low, tense voices. Ava laid out maps, radio codes, and emergency routes, always defaulting to protocol. Jake kept pushing for one thing: Koda gets a chance. She relented, assigning a backup team to stay hidden, watching from a distance. "You and your mutt get one shot," she said. "Don't make me regret this." Jake slipped out of the office, heart pounding, every sense alive. In the hallway, he found Koda waiting, hackles raised, posture alert but not hostile. The tension between them was gone, replaced by something raw, an unspoken understanding. Jake knelt beside the dog, voice barely above a whisper. "It's us. Now. I need you." Koda's tail didn't wag, but his head lowered in recognition. That was enough. Back in the briefing room, Ava updated the team. The plan has changed. Rylan is lead, the shepherd is point. We go quiet, no guns unless I say so. The rest of the unit murmured, but she cut them off. This is about bringing Marcus in alive. No mistakes. Jake caught a look from one of the other canine handlers, a mix of envy and disbelief. Nobody understood why he trusted a broken dog more than the certified ones. Minutes later, they rolled out, the drive silent except for the nervous clicks of radio chatter. Jake sat in the back with Koda, one hand gripping the keychain, the other resting lightly on the shepherd's back. He whispered, "You ready for this?" Koda's eyes were sharp, scanning every window, every passing shadow. They pulled up near the warehouse, headlights off, the world shrouded in tension. Ava gave the signal, voice low but commanding. "Go." Jake unclipped Koda's leash, letting him set the pace. The shepherd moved with purpose, nose close to the ground, following a scent only he could read. Jake followed, every muscle taut, every breath measured. Ava and her team shadowed them, always a few steps behind, guns holstered, but hands never far from triggers. The further they moved into Mossy Creek, the heavier the memories became. Every step pressed Jake deeper into the web of loss, regret, and old betrayal. The ruined bridge, the abandoned warehouse, even the air itself seemed soaked with the ghosts of what happened to David. Jake pushed the thoughts aside. He couldn't afford doubt. Not now. They reached the edge of the clearing. Koda froze, then let out a low, cautious growl. Jake signaled for the team to halt. He knelt beside Koda, voice shaking but steady. "Find him." Koda surged forward, leading Jake into the shadows. Ava and her unit followed at a safe distance, tension radiating from every movement. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and silent. Jake's heart pounded, but he forced himself to focus on Koda, on the promise he'd made. No more shortcuts, no more half-truths, only the hunt and the truth at the end of it. Jake moved through the abandoned warehouse with Koda at his side, every sense on high alert. The building stank of rust, old fuel, and something sour that crawled under the skin. Koda's ears were up, nostrils flaring as he followed an invisible trail. Behind them, Ava's team kept to the shadows, eyes on Jake, ready to step in if the situation spun out of control. The walls, slick with condensation, closed in around them, and the sound of dripping water masked any other noise. In the center of the warehouse, Marcus Thorne stood alone, his figure hunched and wild-maned, fingers twitching around a battered old tape recorder. He didn't flinch when Jake entered. "You made it," Marcus said, voice low, almost relieved. "About time you came to finish what you started." Jake didn't rise to the bait. "This isn't about finishing anything. It's about telling the truth. No more running, Marcus." Koda stayed between the two men, body tense, gaze locked on Marcus, but ready to pivot at the slightest threat. Marcus shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "You want the truth? Read it yourself." He tossed a crumpled piece of paper at Jake's feet. The page was stained, corners burnt, but the words, "Jake's own incident report from the night David died," were unmistakable. Marcus's voice broke, trembling with the weight of years lost to grief and suspicion. "Read it out loud, all of it. Make them hear what you did." Jake hesitated, the old shame choking him, but there was no way around it now. His voice was raw as he read, detailing his arrival on scene, the confusion, the moment he lost sight of David, the retreat order from his partner Carter, the chaos that ended with David's death. When he finished, the silence was suffocating. Jake lowered the paper, eyes stinging. "I failed. I didn't push back when Carter told us to fall back. I believed him when he said we'd regroup, that it was the only way. I was wrong." Marcus's laugh was harsh. "You were more than wrong. You lied to yourself and to everyone else. You didn't just fail David. You helped cover for the man who killed him." Jake bristled, but Marcus pressed on, thrusting the tape recorder toward him. "You think I'm insane? Listen." He pressed play, and Carter's voice crackled from the speaker, panicked but cold. "Don't go back for him. It's too late. No, I don't care. Do you want your pension or not? Just follow the plan. We get paid, nobody asks questions. The weight of the words hit like a punch. Ava and her team listened from the shadows, horror flickering across their faces. Jake stared at the recorder, every muscle in his body going rigid. How long have you had that? Marcus's answer was broken. Long enough to know you weren't the monster I thought you were. Carter was dirty, and you, his voice caught. You were just scared. You believed in the system. I thought if I could make you hurt enough, you'd finally see the truth. The air was thick with old pain and new realization. Koda whined, low and mournful, picking up the shift in the room. Jake turned to Marcus, voice steady. You should have come to me. We could have exposed Carter together. Marcus shook his head, grief making him look much older. Nobody listens to the brother of the dead guy. I needed you to see it for yourself. Jake stepped forward, hands raised. You're not the only one who lost someone that night. I lost faith. I lost my partner. I've lived every day knowing I could have fought harder. Marcus sagged, shoulders trembling. He trusted you, Jake. I did too, once. Jake swallowed, every word scraping his throat. I'm sorry. I can't fix the past, but I can help you bring Carter down. We can do it together. Koda padded forward, nose twitching at the scent of gasoline clinging to Marcus's boots. But this time, the dog's posture was gentle, almost consoling. Marcus stared at the shepherd, then at Jake, disbelief flickering in his eyes. The tape recorder dropped from his hand. Koda stepped up, nudging the device with his snout, then sat quietly, head tilted. It was as if the dog understood the burden, refusing to let Marcus carry it alone. Marcus slid to the ground, tears finally falling, rage burned out. I thought revenge would make it right. It didn't. Jake knelt beside him, letting the silence stand. We're both broken, but we're still breathing. That means we can still fight for what matters. Ava moved in with her team, weapons lowered. She gave Marcus a long, searching look, then nodded at Jake. We'll make the arrest, but this story isn't over. Jake took one last look at Marcus, then at Koda, who pressed close, offering silent comfort. The confrontation had stripped everything bare. There was no enemy here, just more victims of the same lie. Marcus held out his hands, wrists limp, ready for cuffs. Do what you have to do. Jake placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. We're going to make this right. Ava led Marcus away, her voice low and steady. The team filed out, leaving Jake and Koda alone among the ghosts. Jake knelt and buried his hands in the shepherd's fur, drawing strength from the animal's steady presence. We did it, boy. We finally found the truth. Koda licked his hand, a soft sound that spoke louder than any words. But the battle wasn't truly finished. They'd uncovered Carter's betrayal, but justice was only half served. As Koda's gentle growl faded into the quiet, Jake knew the next fight would be even harder, exposing the rot inside their own department and making sure no more lives were ruined by the lies of men in uniform. The truth was finally out. Now it was time to hunt down the man who started it all and make sure no one ever hid behind a badge again. Jake closed the door to his apartment with a slow, exhausted motion, the echo of a dozen sleepless nights humming in his head. The place was small, cluttered, but finally felt like his own. He dropped his jacket on the hook, glanced at the couch, and found Koda curled up but watching his every move. The dog's gaze was sharp, not quite trusting, not quite ready to let the world in. Jake let out a sigh, settling at the kitchen table with a stack of files, evidence, witness statements, the burned keychain, all the debris of a life turned upside down. The next hour was filled with silence and small, awkward adjustments. Jake moved with caution, mindful of the dog's boundaries. He spoke little, kept his gestures slow, and offered food and water without expectation. Koda didn't approach right away. He paced the edge of the room, sniffing at the baseboards, avoiding sudden movements. Any sound, a distant horn, a phone buzz, made his muscles tighten. But when Jake sat to change the gauze on his bandaged arm, the shepherd finally crossed the floor, stopping just out of reach. Jake watched him, not forcing a connection, He peeled back the old bandage, wincing at the sting, and Koda's nose twitched at the smell of antiseptic and old pain. Jake tried to keep his tone light. "It's not as bad as it looks, I promise." Koda stepped closer, eyes on the wound. Jake held still, letting the dog investigate at his own pace. After a long moment, Koda reached out and, without warning, gave the wound a gentle lick. The touch was barely more than a tickle, but Jake felt the shock run all the way to his chest. He chuckled softly. "You're a weird nurse, you know that?" It wasn't an apology or a declaration, just a tentative gesture, an unspoken agreement to try, even if neither of them knew what came next. Jake cleaned his wound, then rummaged through a drawer for a treat, tossing it underhand. Koda caught it in midair, retreating to the far side of the coffee table, chewing with that same wary focus. Jake leaned back, feeling the tension in his shoulders loosen, just a notch. Hours passed, marked by little victories. Koda inched closer each time Jake spoke softly. Jake stopped expecting the dog to follow him from room to room, instead letting him choose when to join. By the end of the evening, Koda lay near Jake's feet, his head on his paws, watching the flicker of the TV with mild curiosity. No grand bonding moment, no sudden leap into trust, just a slow unraveling of fear. Jake found himself talking more than he expected. He confessed his doubts, his regrets, the moments where he'd almost walked away from everything. "You know, I spent a long time believing I had to fix things alone. Turns out, nobody gets through this stuff alone, not even a stubborn old cop." Koda listened, not judging, his breath a steady rhythm in the quiet apartment. When night fell, Jake prepared the old futon with a blanket, expecting to sleep alone. Instead, Koda hopped up without invitation, curled into a tight ball at the far corner, and closed his eyes. The trust wasn't total, but it was enough to let the silence feel safe. Jake lay awake for a while, listening to the shepherd's breathing, every slow inhale a sign that things might finally change. In the morning, Jake woke to Koda's head resting against his unbandaged arm. The dog blinked sleepily, then lifted his head, not quite ready for belly rubs, but no longer shying away from touch. Jake smiled, not saying a word. They ate breakfast together, Jake at the table, Koda at his bowl, both moving with the slow grace of survivors learning new routines. The wounds, physical and invisible, remained, but they began to feel less like signs of failure and more like badges of endurance. Jake caught his reflection, saw the scar running along his jaw, and didn't look away. He let the feeling sink in. He was not a bad man, just one who'd made mistakes and survived them. He watched Koda, who stared out the window with eyes that had seen too much but were still searching for hope. They filled the day with short walks, each one a lesson in patience. Neighbors gave Jake strange looks, but he ignored them, focusing on every step Koda took closer to trust. In the evening, Jake sat on the floor, bandaged arm resting on his knee, and spoke quietly. "I can't change what happened. I can only promise to do better from now on." "For both of us," Koda settled beside him, their shadows cast together on the faded rug, the space between them shrinking a little more. Neither man nor dog needed to say a word. The truce was real. From shared pain, something new had started to grow. It wasn't forgiveness or healing yet, but it was the fragile beginning of both. Jake looked at Koda, meeting those guarded brown eyes, and realized he finally had an ally he could count on. But as dusk slipped through the blinds, the reality pressed in. Carter was still out there, the real story not yet finished. Jake glanced at the wall where the case files hung like an accusation. He knew he and Ava would have to keep digging, and that Koda, survivor, fighter, unlikely friend, was now their most important ally. The battle for the truth was only getting started, but Jake didn't feel alone anymore. He had a dog by his side who understood exactly what it meant to fight for a second chance. Jake sat hunched over the desk in the dim police office, lamplight casting deep shadows across the pile of files. His hand, still bandaged, turned page after page, while the faint hum of the city outside faded into the background. Ava sat beside him, her usual composure edged with exhaustion. The two barely spoke, each word weighted by everything they'd learned. The old tape recorder lay between them, its play button worn smooth. They listened to Carter's voice over and over, dissecting every pause, every order, every hint of fear or greed. Each time the words repeated, "Do you want your pension or not? Just follow the plan." The disgust in Jake's gut deepened. Ava's fingers drummed on a stack of old patrol logs. "The money trail's messy, but there's a pattern," she said, sliding spreadsheets across the table. "See these withdrawals? Always just after late-night runs along David's patrol route." Carter had access to the department's GPS logs, and he'd adjust his shift just enough to avoid suspicion. Jake's jaw clenched. He was using David as cover. Every time Carter called an audible, there was a payoff somewhere nearby. He knew exactly what he was doing. They poured through bank records, phone logs, and arrest reports that Carter had signed off on. It was all there, a history of well-timed errors and missing evidence. Jake's trust crumpled with each connection. "I believed him," Jake muttered. "I let him lead me, thinking he was a good cop. The shame was real, but so was the fury building beneath it." Ava's tone sharpened. "You're not the only one." The man was a professional at hiding his tracks. He made everyone around him an unknowing accomplice. Jake stared at the evidence wall. Photographs of David and Carter pinned side by side. He slammed his fist down, rattling the desk. "David's name got dragged through the mud for this. Carter played all of us." He looked at Ava, voice tight. "We have to go to internal affairs." Ava shook her head. "Not yet. Carter still has friends in the department. If we go public too soon, he'll vanish. Or worse, someone will warn him." Her words stung, but Jake knew she was right. The betrayal gnawed at him, colder than any wound. The scent of disinfectant and cheap coffee lingered in the air. But beneath it, Jake tasted something metallic, almost poisonous. The taste of trust turned to venom. He paced the room, Koda's leash gripped in one hand, the shepherd never far from his side. Koda watched, picking up on every shift in Jake's mood, every rise in tension. Ava traced their next steps with a pin. If Carter's still running money for that crew, he'll have to make a move soon. The last drop-off was right before David died. There's another deposit scheduled for tomorrow, coded the same way. Jake's eyes narrowed. He'll go back to the old route, won't he? Same spot near Mossy Creek. Ava nodded. It's the only place he feels safe. But we can't spook him. We need him to believe nobody suspects. Jake's mind reeled at the realization. Everything had started and ended in those woods. The place where he'd lost a friend, where he'd nearly lost his life, and where Koda had almost burned for someone else's sins. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to focus. If we're going back there, we do it on our terms. No backup, no radios, nothing Carter can trace. Ava agreed, but her eyes stayed on the evidence wall. "And Jake, don't let this become personal. If you go in looking for revenge, you'll make a mistake. This has to be about David, about the truth." He nodded, swallowing the bitterness that threatened to take over. He looked down at Koda, who met his gaze with silent understanding. Jake knelt, speaking quietly. "We're going back, buddy, but this time we're finishing it." The shepherd pressed his head against Jake's knee. Silent vow of support. Jake straightened, resolve hardening. No more shadows, no more secrets. Ava packed the files into a plain brown envelope. No names, no department markings. "We'll keep this with us. If anything goes wrong, someone needs to know." Jake clipped Koda's leash, his hands steady now. "Let's go before I lose my nerve." They left through the back door, blending into the city's hush. The night was cold, but it was nothing compared to the chill left by Carter's betrayal. They drove in silence, tension thick but focused. Every mile toward Mossy Creek was a step deeper into old memories and unfinished business. Jake gripped the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "He taught me everything about patrol work," Jake said, voice barely above a whisper. "I trusted him with my life." Ava replied, her tone blunt. "He used that trust to cover his crimes. You get one shot at fixing this." When the headlights finally caught the sign for Mossy Creek, Jake felt the old dread mix with new determination. He wasn't just fighting for David anymore. He was fighting to clear both their names, to break the cycle of corruption Carter had started. The past wouldn't let him rest, not until the truth was out in the open. Carter's betrayal had a taste that wouldn't leave Jake's mouth. It was sharp, metallic, and cold, cutting deeper than any wound, burning longer than any scar. But this time Jake wasn't walking into the darkness alone. Koda was with him, scars and all, and together they would bring Carter's secrets to light. The hunt wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about finally, brutally, setting things right at the very place where everything went wrong. Jake stood at the edge of Mossy Creek, the past pressing down on his shoulders like a weight he could never shake. Koda lingered at his side, muscles tight and nose twitching at the scents hidden beneath the undergrowth. This was where everything had shattered, where David had fallen, where Carter's betrayal began, where Jake's own faith died in the mud. The forest felt charged, every broken twig and crushed leaf echoing the pain that had been left behind. Jake looked down at Koda, voice low but steady. "We have to go back. I need your help, not as a canine but as my partner. I can't do this alone." Koda hesitated, his paws rooted to the ground, tail low. The shepherd's eyes darted across the clearing, haunted by memories only he understood. He moved in short, nervous bursts, sniffing the ground, every step tense, as if expecting another blow. Jake crouched beside him, offering no command, only a plea. "I know this place hurts you. It hurts me too. But there's something here we need to find. I promise you, if you help me, I'll never let anyone hurt you again." The words seemed to settle Koda, if only a little. He pressed his nose into the soil, following an invisible trail, his body shaking with each breath. Jake followed, staying close but never reaching out, letting the dog set the pace. They circled the base of a gnarled tree, its bark scarred from a bullet years ago. Koda stopped suddenly, hackles raised, a low whine rumbling in his throat. He pawed at the dirt, digging furiously, until his claws scraped something cold and metallic. Jake knelt, brushing away the loose earth. His heart skipped when he saw it. A shell casing, half buried but unmistakable. He picked it up, examining the markings. This wasn't standard police issue. It was something else, something Carter had never logged in any report. Jake held it up, voice trembling with hope and anger. "This is it! Koda, this proves everything. Carter was never just covering his tracks. He was using ammo nobody else had access to." Koda sniffed the shell, then pressed against Jake's side, seeking comfort after the storm of memory. Jake stroked his fur gently. "You did it. You found the truth." The shepherd relaxed a fraction, letting himself lean into Jake's touch. The bond between them wasn't built on commands or training anymore. It was built on a shared promise. No more lies. No more betrayal. Jake slipped the casing into an evidence bag, determination hardening in his chest. "We're not finished, not yet." He looked at Koda, his voice firm but full of gratitude. "This ends tonight. We bring Carter down together." Koda's tail flicked, eyes locked on Jake, ready for the next battle. The proof in Jake's pocket was more than a bullet. It was a lifeline thrown across years of guilt. Now, armed with the truth, and with Koda's trust restored, Jake could finally set the trap for Carter. The next move would decide everything. For justice, for David, and for the battered trust between man and dog. Jake paced the floor of the old warehouse, nerves raw as he rehearsed his next words. He dialed Carter with a steady hand, letting every ounce of frustration and betrayal seep into his voice. "I've got something you want, Carter. Marcus's tape, and a deal for both of us. Come alone, or we both lose everything." There was a pause, then Carter's smug reply, "Knew you'd come around, Jake. Where's the meeting?" Minutes later, headlights swept across the cracked concrete, and Carter walked in, all swagger and self-assurance, confident this was just another score to tie off. Jake didn't bother hiding his contempt. "You want the evidence? It's all here. But you're cutting me in, or the whole department gets to hear Marcus's recording." Carter grinned, completely at ease. "You're smarter than I thought, Rylan. Shame about David, but that's what happens when you get in the way." He spoke without guilt, openly confessing to the retreat order, justifying it as a necessary evil to protect the operation and their own skin. Jake barely kept his rage in check. So it was all about money? David died for your side hustle? Carter's eyes narrowed, a cold glint betraying his annoyance at being questioned. Don't act high and mighty. You followed orders. Nobody forced you to do anything. Then his voice dropped to a warning, hand moving toward his jacket. Now hand it over. Without warning, Carter drew his pistol, leveling it at Jake's chest. Before he could pull the trigger, a blur shot from the shadows. Koda, tense and focused, clamped his jaws on Carter's gun hand and ripped the weapon free, sending it clattering across the floor. Carter reeled in shock, shouting the old canine command that once made Koda cower in obedience. Down, now! The words hung heavy in the air, a sick echo of all the pain and punishment Carter ever delivered. Koda froze, caught in the grip of memory, body rigid with fear. His eyes darted between Carter and Jake, the old terror warring with everything he'd learned about trust. The tension crackled, the entire trap hinging on whether Koda would fall back into old habits or stand with the man who'd shown him kindness and loyalty. In that charged moment, everyone in the room realized the stakes were no longer just about evidence or confession. They were about whose voice Koda would obey, the man who broke him or the one who offered him a new life. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath. What happened next would determine not only Carter's fate, but Koda's and Jake's fight for redemption. The tension in the warehouse grew thick enough to choke on. Carter stood a few feet away, hand trembling as he watched Koda, who now stood rigid between him and Jake. The old canine command still echoed in the air, but Koda did not move to attack or cower. He simply planted himself in front of Jake, chest heaving, ears pinned back, his entire body caught between muscle memory and something deeper. Carter's glare was sharp, but a flicker of uncertainty crept in as he realized the dog he once broke was no longer under his control. Jake locked eyes with Koda, voice soft but unwavering. You don't have to listen to him. I trust you. Koda, you're not a mistake. The words hung between them, cutting through the panic and doubt. Koda trembled, gaze locked on Carter's face, refusing to back down. Instead of following the old order, he issued a low, guttural growl, sending a ripple of dread through Carter. Jake did nothing to command or restrain. He simply stood behind Koda, a silent show of support. Carter raised his arm, desperate to reassert authority, but Koda lunged, not to bite, but to knock the pistol clean from Carter's grip, sending it skittering across the floor. The move was swift and deliberate, a clear rejection of every cruel lesson Carter had forced on him. For the first time, Carter looked afraid. He took a step back, realizing that power had shifted, that the animal he had once used as a tool now protected someone else. Suddenly, Ava and the backup team burst into the warehouse, guns raised and voices commanding, "Drop to your knees, hands behind your head." Carter, panic overtaking arrogance, obeyed without argument. Ava cuffed him herself, expression stone cold. "You're finished, Carter. Everything you did is coming to light." Jake knelt and wrapped an arm around Koda's neck, pride and relief flooding his voice. "You chose right, partner. You're free." Koda leaned into Jake, tail wagging once, tension easing from his frame. For both man and dog, the victory wasn't just about stopping Carter, but proving that loyalty could be stronger than fear, that old scars could be rewritten by trust. In that moment, justice was more than a conviction. It was a release from every chain Carter had tried to bind them with. The team hauled Carter away, and Jake remained in the darkened warehouse with Koda, letting the reality settle in. The enemy had fallen, but their fight for healing, for acceptance, for a life rebuilt was only just beginning. This was not the end, but the first real step toward a second chance. The precinct's small briefing room felt transformed for the first time in months. Sunlight crept across rows of chairs and glinted off the polished badge newly returned to Jake's chest. The air buzzed with quiet pride and a touch of disbelief, most of all from Jake himself, still getting used to the weight of honor restored. Officers filed in. A few clapped him on the back, others simply nodded, understanding that words were sometimes unnecessary. At the center of the room stood Koda, tail low but not tucked, wearing a new canine collar with a tag that gleamed in the light. Ben, the department's longtime vet and canine expert, knelt to clip the tag on. "You earned this, big guy," he said, voice gruff but affectionate. Koda sat perfectly still, accepting the recognition, eyes scanning the room but always drifting back to Jake. Ava stepped up, holding a folder with the official paperwork, both for Jake's reinstatement and Koda's dual status as a specialized search and therapy dog. "Nobody here doubts what you two accomplished," she said, her tone finally softening. "Today, we're not just recognizing bravery, we're recognizing healing." She handed the folder to Jake, who blinked once, grounding himself in the moment. He glanced at Koda, then at Ava and Ben, and smiled. "I always thought I saved him from the fire," Jake said quietly. "But the truth is, he saved me from mine. Koda didn't need another command. He needed to believe in someone, and so did I." The applause that followed was genuine but brief, because no one wanted to overshadow the private victory behind the public moment. When the ceremony ended, Jake knelt down and pressed his forehead gently to Koda's. "We made it, partner. They call it redemption. I call it surviving. Together." Koda licked his cheek, the tension of their journey slowly replaced by trust and understanding. The scars they both carried, Koda's from years of abuse, Jake's from shame and failure, would not disappear. They had become part of their story, evidence not of weakness, but of survival and transformation. The whispers that once followed Jake through the halls had faded. In their place was respect and something deeper, proof that trust once shattered could be rebuilt. From that day forward, Koda was more than a tool or a symbol. He was a living reminder that redemption was possible, that a broken past did not dictate the future. Together, they returned to Mossy Creek, not as victims or fugitives, but as survivors willing to face whatever came next. In that wet forest where everything once fell apart, two wounded souls carved new paths side by side. Jake found hope in Koda's resilience, and Koda found security in Jake's promise. Neither had worn shining armor or played the part of a perfect hero, yet both had learned that true courage was silent and patient, growing stronger with every step forward. Remember, sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones in gleaming uniforms. They're the ones who walk beside you, carrying scars and an unspoken vow to never leave your side. In the end, Jake and Koda didn't become heroes. They just found a way to trust and heal together. Jake learned that strength means admitting pain and choosing to stand back up, while Koda proved that loyalty and hope can survive even the worst betrayal. Their scars remain, but so does their bond. What lesson would you take from their story? Have you ever given or received a second chance? Share your thoughts or personal experience in the comments. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life journeys of healing and hope.